Build professional skills this semester with Adobe Creative Cloud and create standout work both in and out of the classroom. Save big on professional creativity tools. Students get 65% off Adobe Creative Cloud, including Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, Acrobat Pro, and 20+ creative apps. No matter what project you're working on, Adobe Creative Cloud apps can help you take it to the next level. Visit adobe.com/student to learn more.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
The Romantics singing about talking in your sleep. You know, if you're a fan of horror movies, you've probably seen a few of the different incarnations of the mummy or different films involving mummies. And generally, they're depicted as being perpetually asleep until something happens and they're awoken. Well, most of the mummies that we discover these days, and I'm not talking about the ones that we celebrate on Mother's Day, they're not necessarily asleep, but they're undiscovered until they're discovered. There's a very famous ice mummy that was discovered in 1991 by a pair of European hikers in the Alps. A very well-preserved 5,300-year-old mummy because of the ice. But as important as the discovery of that mummy was, it also really raised a pivotal question, which is who has the right to the ice's information? That is one of the many questions that is tackled in the new book that everybody is talking about, The Age of Melt, What Glaciers, Ice Mummies, and Ancient Artifacts Teach Us About Climate Change and a Future Without Ice. I'm very, very pleased to be joined by its author, renowned science writer Lisa Baril. Lisa, thanks for staying up late with us.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me.
So, Lisa, tell us about that mummy that was discovered, that ice mummy that was discovered in 1991, and how that discovery by those European hikers resulted in your work in The Age of Melt.
Yeah, Ötzi is a fascinating mummy that, like you said, is discovered in 1991, and it was kind of a happenstance discovery where these two hikers were hiking off trail in the Alps and they saw something odd poking through the snow and they thought they'd go and wander over and take a look. And they found this body and he was so well preserved. His skin was still attached to his body. All of his limbs were attached. And so he looked like he had died just maybe a few years ago. And everybody thought initially that this was someone who had lost his life just, recently, hypothermia, whatever. Lots of people, come to their end in the mountains. And this is just another one of them. But when they dated him and they saw him, the archaeologists down in Austria, and looked at all of these strange tools that he came down the mountain with, they thought, well, this guy's way older than what we initially suspected. So he's actually from the late Neolithic, which is right around the farming era. So, yeah, he's pretty amazing. And he sort of kicked off this trend of ice patch archaeology where archaeologists go to these mountain environments looking for artifacts, and hopefully they hope another ice mummy.
So that ice mummy's name is pronounced Ötzi. That's the proper pronunciation. Okay. So melting ice has revealed everything from ancient wooden tools to baby mammoths. What's the most mysterious or surprising thing you've come across during your research that might change how we think about the past?
I think that one of the things that's super interesting was just how people used the mountains, and archaeologists really didn't think that people were in the mountains as much as they were before ice patches started melting and revealing all of these artifacts. So one of the things is that people were going to the mountains to hunt caribou. They call them caribou in Scandinavia and reindeer here in North America. But these animals are cold. They're adapted to cold environments. So they head to the ice during summer when it's super hot out and they just need to cool off and avoid biting insects. And hunters knew this. And so they would use that habit to their advantage by sneaking up on these reindeer and harvesting them right off of the ice patches. But when they missed their shot, which often happens, and you're hunting with an ancient bow and arrow, the arrow would make its way into the ice where it would just be preserved for thousands of years.
Wow. So going back to Ötzi for a second, he was discovered 5,300 years after his death. And you mentioned other folks for the last 30 years or so have been perpetually looking for other ice mummies. Do you think there are other hidden ice mummies or artifacts waiting to be uncovered? And if so, if the answer to that is yes, what could they actually teach us about lost civilizations?
Well, I don't think first of all, I do think that there are other mummies in the ice that are preserved. It's a matter of finding them. There are tens of thousands of ice patches in the world. Who knows, millions probably. And so, it's a matter of if you're there at the right time, that they're melting and finding the body. So there's a lot of things that have to come together in order to find something like that, and which is part of what makes Ötzi so amazing. But I don't think that we're going to be discovering lost civilizations necessarily. It's more about the people that we know about that lived in these areas that were really using these mountain environments more than anyone ever thought they did.
Gotcha. At 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. My guest is Lisa Baril. Her book has gotten a lot of attention, very, very well reviewed. It's called The Age of Melt: What Glaciers, Ice Mummies, and Ancient Artifacts Teach Us About Climate, Culture, and a Future Without Ice. Lisa, let's talk climate, because whenever I do segments that even mention climate, there's a strong segment of the audience. I don't think it's a majority, but it's a sizable portion of the audience that doesn't even buy the idea of man-made climate change. And many of our listeners are skeptical of the idea that humans are causing climate change. What do you say to those who believe the Earth naturally goes through warming and cooling cycles and that the melting ice is just part of one of these cycles?
That's a great question. The thing with human-caused climate change is that it's happening at such a rapid rate that we've never, seen in the past. And so scientists have been looking at climate and how it's changed naturally over time throughout Earth's history. And it's true that there have been periods that have been warmer than they are now in the past, or colder than they are in the past, and that the climate has done these huge swings from one state to another. What's unique about recent climate change is that it's happened over just the last 50, 100 years. I mean, it's this really short, compressed amount of time. And the temperature is rising more rapidly than scientists have ever seen in the past. And you can see it. You can see it in the ice. So that's one of the things that I love about ice patch archaeology and looking at glaciers is that it's really obvious that they're melting. So you take a picture from 10, 50 years ago and compare it to today, and you see how much those glaciers are retreating, even as far back, a few years ago, 5 years ago. If some of your listeners go to Alaska, let's say, they might notice that the glaciers are smaller than they were the first time they visited.
Some argue that what they might call alarmist narratives about climate change, they overshadow the true historical patterns of the Earth. Can you tell us about other periods in history when glaciers retreated or advanced and what lessons we might learn from them? I know you just alluded to the fact that this is happening at a much more rapid pace, but what else can we learn from looking at Earth's history?
Yeah, so there was a period of time not too long ago, a few hundred years ago, where glaciers, the climate changed. There was a series of volcanic eruptions, and it sort of cooled the Earth for a little bit. And it was mostly in northern Europe, where the glaciers were advancing rapidly down the mountains, and it led to a lot of strife in Europe, where there were famines, and just because the climate was cooler and people were having trouble growing crops, and then grain prices increased. So there was a lot of havoc that was caused because of this abrupt change in climate. I think, one of the things that is different about current climate change is that it's global in extent. It's happening everywhere, all over the world. Whereas things like these past anomalies, like the Little Ice Age, was really restricted to the Northern Hemisphere and largely in Europe. So that's one, major difference between human-caused climate change and these past natural changes.
That makes total sense. Let me ask you this, and this may sound a little silly, but in your book, you write about how melting glaciers are revealing incredible historical artifacts. And by the way, if people are just tuning in, I'm Frank Morano. This is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Lisa Baril. Could it be that this process is part of the Earth's natural cycle of renewal, where we're meant to discover these long-hidden treasures in the present day?
That's an interesting question. I think that it's super interesting that, so ice patch archaeology came about because of climate change. If the Earth hadn't been, if it's not warming, we wouldn't be finding these artifacts. It's only in the last 30 years that these artifacts have started emerging. Before that, a couple of things melted out, but nothing on the scale of what we're seeing now. And so, I don't think there's any reason to believe that it's like a part of a natural cycle, given what we know about what, greenhouse gases in our atmosphere and things like that, that it's anything that is a natural part of our system right now. It's an interesting benefit, I suppose, to the climate crisis is that, we're learning things about humans that we just didn't know before the ice was melting. So it's kind of a unique aspect.
Right. It's sort of an interesting paradox that the more the ice melts, the more that we learn about the past. But your point's well taken. So there's a lot of debate around who should have the rights to artifacts that are found in glaciers. Do you think it's possible that as we learn more from melting ice, that we might uncover artifacts that are so controversial that they could seriously rewrite everything that we know about human history, or at least a good portion of it?
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor, or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. Micro-tabb.com.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, Extra Strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
No, I don't think that we're going to find anything that's going to rewrite human history or even a good portion of it. I think it's just going to add to our wealth of knowledge and the things that we already know about human history. As far as like who owns these artifacts, it's such a great question because it's really it is a difficult question. I mean, when you're talking about artifacts in North America and the Yukon, in Canada, for instance, there's lots of artifacts melting out there. Well, that's part of the Indigenous First Nations people's heritage. So there's, been some controversy over who owns those artifacts. And some archaeologists would say, well, it's like a world heritage, it's everyone's, but maybe some other people might say, no, it's actually our cultural heritage. So it depends on where you are in the world to how you might view those artifacts and who they belong to.
Gotcha. It makes sense. So you've written about the indigenous people's relationship with ice. Do you think their traditional knowledge offers a different perspective on glaciers that we should pay more attention to? And does it change or at least challenge the current scientific view on climate change?
I think that they have Indigenous First Nations are very diverse people, lots of different cultures in North America here. And I think that they offer a very unique perspective on these artifacts because they look at them as things and objects that their ancestors used. So they hold them in a different light, whereas archaeologists are looking at them primarily scientifically, whereas an indigenous person might look at them more culturally or spiritually. And so that's just a different perspective, and it's, I think, really useful to merge those two or take into account both of those types of perspectives.
You do talk about a lot of these different cultures and how they view glaciers and ice. Are there any myths or legends about ice that intrigue you? And do you think any of these stories contain any elements of truth that we haven't fully explored yet?
Yeah, I do. There are lots of cultural stories about glaciers and traveling under when there's a little ice age, for instance, in North America. Glaciers were so large that they actually spanned across rivers, and the meltwater from these rivers carved a cave into them, and people would travel by boat underneath the glacier. But you're supposed to not talk when you're under the glacier for fear that it might collapse on you. There are other cultural stories about not cooking with grease if you're traveling across a glacier and things like that. And so I think that they do have some scientific basis for sure. Like, for instance, not cooking grease on a glacier. There's a lot of surging glaciers in the Yukon, which means that they just, like, normally glaciers move very slowly, but sometimes they can, for whatever reason, slip along their bases where they're on the bedrock and move forward at very fast paces and cause a lot of destruction. And so I think that maybe that myth of not cooking grease on a glacier could be related to that. So I think there's a lot to learn from these cultural stories as well.
That is interesting. There were some ancient traditions that viewed ice as something sacred or mystical, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I traveled to Peru in the Andes, and there is an ancient pilgrimage That's still going on today, where the indigenous people, the Quechua there, travel in June to go to the high mountains, like 16,000 feet, where you can hardly breathe. It's really difficult to be up there, and pay homage to the glacier there, because they know and recognize the Andes are very dry, and they know and they recognize that glaciers, they depend on them for farming and irrigating their crops and just for basic living. And so that's part of their journey, is to go up to this glacier and pay their respects to it.
You mentioned in your book that while we can't rewind the clock, we can use the knowledge gained from melting ice to help future generations. What are some of the most important lessons that you've learned from these discoveries, and how do you think they can influence our future?
Yeah, I think that one of the primary things that I learned is that we know so little. I mean, we know a lot, but we're just scratching the surface of how humans have interacted with the environment in the past. And I think that the lessons we can learn from the past and how humans have adapted or not adapted to different climates in the past and climate change can really help inform how we might adapt to current climate change and what might happen in the future. And so I think, these artifacts really allow us or force us to think about people in the past. And I think, that makes me think about, well, what about my my descendants in the future? Like, what is their life going to be, and what are they going to think of us now and our actions and what we did or did not do to, the environment?
If you were to have a glass of scotch or a glass of water, let's say, and take an ice cube from my refrigerator in New York and taste it and drink it, the water or the scotch with the ice cube from there, and then compare that to a little bit of ice that you chisel off a glacier on the other side of the world, and use a little bit of ice from that glacier to cool the same drink, would the ice taste different?
Yeah, there are some people that say it would, and it does, because that's an actual thing where you can go to fancy places, probably in Europe mostly, and get glacial ice.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if it's worth it or not, if it's worth the upcharge, or if it all just tastes like ice.
Yeah, I think it probably all just tastes like ice, and some is better than others.
A lot of skeptics, just to go back on behalf of the skeptics, they'll argue that the focus on climate change might distract us from other pressing environmental issues. I hear this all the time. In your travels and in your research, did you see evidence that perhaps we're missing the bigger picture by focusing too much on glaciers and on melting ice?
Melting ice and glaciers is one aspect, a consequence of climate change, but it's super important because a lot of people think about the poles when they're talking about climate change or thinking about climate change and rising sea levels, and that's definitely an issue. But mountain glaciers are also super important for everyone, for almost a third of the people that live in the world. Even if you don't live near a mountain, that snow melt and that glacial melt is feeding rivers and streams that people like to fish, and they need cold water for these fish to thrive. They irrigate farmlands and, ranch lands, and they, are responsible for where our water to live, swimming pools in the summer and ice skating rinks in the winter. So there's a lot that we depend on from these mountain glaciers. So I think it's well warranted for us to really be concerned about it.
I know the Egyptians went to a lot of pains to preserve their dead, especially people like pharaohs and even the pets of pharaohs and things like that. The ice has preserved things that we never thought possible. We talked about Utsi. You mentioned certain tools and things like that. But it's preserved mummies to entire ecosystems. Is there any evidence at all that suggests that some ancient civilizations might have intentionally used ice to preserve their dead or their valuables for future generations?
Oh, that's such a great question. No, right now there is no evidence of that, but I will say that some people thought that maybe Ötzi had been buried there because it was just such a strange thing. Like, all of these things had to come together for this person to have been so well preserved, and nothing like that had ever been found before, that they thought he must have been buried there in the mountains. Most scientists don't think that. They think, he accidentally died. Well, and he was murdered. We know that he was shot in the back with an arrow. So that kind of, yeah. And so there's a whole intrigue there. But it just, I guess, as the ice continues to melt, we'll see. Perhaps people did use it as a burial site. That's certainly possible.
Lisa Baril, I want to encourage people, if they're interested in ice patch archaeology or anything that we've talked about here, to check out your book, The Age of Melt: What Glaciers, Ice Mummies, and Ancient Artifacts Teach Us About Climate, Culture, and a Future Without Ice. Thanks so much for joining me on the radio.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. If you want to comment on any portion of our discussion, you can absolutely give me a call. Our number is 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced, specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor, or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. Micro-tabb.com.